Hello, everyone. I'm Angelina Mojica, wishing you a good morning. This is your Good Morning Minute. I have a special guest here, Keana Tucker, who will be talking about rising from the ashes, how one woman overcame adversity to achieve success. So I'm going to jump right into it. Keana, go ahead and introduce yourself to our listeners.
Hi, everyone. I am Keana Shatteen, and I am an author, speaker, and coach. And I am the author of Healing Out Loud, which is about overcoming struggles and adversity. As someone who has overcome a lot of challenges, mental, emotional, personal struggles, I am here to help embrace and teach others how to move past those things and live a fulfilling life.
Awesome. And so glad to have you here. And I'm so sorry. I said Tucker, but you actually go by
That's okay.
Keana. And what was the last name again?
Shatteen. That's actually my first and middle name. Shatteen is my mother's maiden name, but it's my middle name. So I go
Oh,
by my
okay.
first and middle name.
Well, I'm so sorry for that. So we'll get that
That's okay.
corrected. But
No worries.
okay, so when we talk about rising from ashes, I normally think of a phoenix that is just emerging. And
Mm.
when you think of that phoenix, it's the idea of coming out stronger, more empowered. So tell us some of the key challenges and adversities that you faced in your story.
Excellent question. 5 years ago, actually, when I started the book, it talks about where I was 5 years ago, where I had a suicide attempt. And at the moment during that time and the events leading up to it, it really challenged me and triggered me in terms of my abandonment and attachment wounds. As a child, I often struggle with not being able to fully understand my emotions and being able to vocalize what I was feeling. My mother died when I was a teenager, and I shouldn't say it kind of, it absolutely changed who I was as an individual, and in a sense, I realized that it kind of stunted my emotional growth because even though physically I was growing as a woman, emotionally I wasn't. I was still the same little girl that I was when my mother died out of nowhere at the age of
Mhm.
16, and carrying that baggage into my relationships, into the workplace, and just the way that it hindered me to the point I was ready to end my life. But since that time, I've realized that all of that happened to me wasn't anything to be afraid of or ashamed of. And it didn't really happen to me, it happened for me to be able to help other people in their journeys and their own personal struggles, whether it's with grief or depression or alcoholism, whatever the case may be. I have a story that can relate to a lot of people in this world. And I'm here to do it in only a way that I can do it, and it's authentically and vulnerably.
And I appreciate your vulnerability. Um,
Yeah.
and it's hard to get to that place too. And so your healing journey was definitely something that had to have been important and a focus in order for you to get to this point in life. Um, so you talked about some daily life impacts that you had to encounter. You talked about it carrying over into like relationships and your work environment and things like that. Um, Explain that a little further. What was your mental health processing like at that point, and to what extent did it affect those situations?
It really affected who I was as an individual. I
Mm,
didn't really know who I was, what I enjoyed, what I liked, because I was so busy trying to be a people pleaser in terms of the way I showed up in my relationship. So I would just please my partner, not paying attention to what I felt or even being able to vocally express how I felt or what I was feeling. And it stunted me. I was suppressed and repressed my emotions. And it happened as early as when I was a teenager. I had a physically abusive relationship, and I suffered in silence because I was embarrassed and I was ashamed. And I didn't know how to get through it until I was able to get through it. And it showed me that I was consistently making the same mistake, even as an adult, being a married woman. And when I had my attempt 5 years ago, it was during the separation because the marriage was ended. And it was really hard. It was difficult for me because of my past abandonment wounds, letting go of the person I was anticipating on spending the rest of my life with, and being afraid of just change and starting over, and all the stories in my head of being single and the dating pool not being that favorable. And I just had this story in my head. I was just going to be a single woman for the rest of my life. Nobody would want me because I was broken and damaged. And none of that was true. None of us are broken.
And that hits and resonates with me, coming from my own mental health struggles with depression and even my own attempts with suicide as well. And what I'm hearing is there was a lot of social or maybe cultural factors that contribute to these difficulties. Um, as women, we are expected to uphold this image in society that sometimes we struggle and we fall into that perfectionism ideals, and we look at those things and going, okay, I'm not quote unquote normal because I don't fit into these societal expectations or whatever cultural norms those are. And how did you overcome that? Because that you talk about identity, and that plays a big part in building identity, especially in young adolescent years.
Great question. And it actually starts with understanding who we are on the inside, meaning connecting with our hearts and our souls. What brings us joy? What brings us passion? What makes us smile? What's our reason for getting out of bed every day? I didn't have any of that. I didn't know, I never knew who I was. I never understood what I valued, but I knew I needed to go to work every day to provide for my family. And I'm supposed to have a husband and a child to live happily ever after. And I'm supposed to do what society says I'm supposed to do. And I have to keep going and going and going. But it wasn't until I separated that I answering those questions and asking myself, who am I on the inside? Why am I really here? And it's not just to be anyone's wife or mother, although I'm not just, counting that, because those are wonderful things to be. But I have a gift. We all have a gift. We have a light inside of us that God brought us here to create and to bring out and to share with the world. And it wasn't until I started asking myself these tough questions, doing the inner healing work, meaning praying and meditating and working with trusted people to help support me, and to find someone that I could essentially confess these things that I had been holding on to for so long. And that's when I was finally able to start to see the value in myself and loving myself for just the way that I am, because there's nothing wrong with me. And I made a lot of mistakes in my marriage, but that didn't define me. And it doesn't determine me as an individual. It was just a moment, a chapter. It doesn't define the entire story.
And I love that you hit, it's just a moment in time. Especially when you're trying to talk with someone who has suicidal ideations, they see it as this is always, or and I speak from my from my own perspective, because again, but it is almost kind of like, I'm never going to be able to do this, or this is always happening to me, and not really understanding this is just a moment in time compared to a lifetime, compared to many years to come. And I think that was, for me, the shift in mindset that I needed to understand, like, this is just a hurdle. Like, these are just obstacles that you're getting through. But you also mentioned identity. And I think even when you talked about putting walls up because you suffered in silence, I think is what you said. And you put these walls up, it's hard because you're trying to shut out emotions and disassociate from those things that you also can't enjoy anything that's happening to you in your life. So how did you start breaking down those barriers? What strengths did you find, or motivation to rise above these challenges?
I think for me, it was the fact that it felt like I was taking one step forward and two steps backwards, even after my attempt. It's like it happened, but then what? I was still living in the chaos, and the fact that I was not willing to accept that it's time for me to move on. The marriage is over, and I had already admitted that, but I just didn't want to live alone. So it was the point where that doesn't work. You can't start a new chapter still in the same environment. But the fear of being alone is what was scaring me. And I had to see that nobody is going to fix me but me. Nobody can do it for me because nobody knows what it feels like inside of my skin, inside of my body, and in my mind, because depression is such a heavy, heavy thing. And nobody understands what that feels like until you have been in those shoes, to have to constantly battle the thoughts in your mind and have an internal fight with yourself to tell yourself that what you're thinking is not true. And to just really, I had to just listen to my heart and just get out of my mind. And I started meditating. I started doing more praying. I started actually putting affirmations up around my house because I needed to see visual things to inspire me, to empower me to get up out of bed every day, because I didn't want to get out of bed every day. I almost had a second attempt shortly after the first attempt. And I was just tired of the chaos. I was tired of the heaviness and the darkness. And then COVID hit, and then everything shut down. But it was a saving grace for me because I didn't want to leave the house anyway. I had already been isolated so much that it became a new normal. But in the middle of the isolation, I started doing actual work. I didn't just isolate and stay sad or stay in the depression. I just started doing one thing different each day. Today, I'm gonna get out the bed and just go to the living room. Then I just got more inspired, just taking it one day at a time. Eventually, life started looking good. And even though it's a pandemic, I had already had a pandemic in 2019. So COVID didn't scare me. It didn't hinder me like it did a lot of people. But to me, it did the opposite. It inspired me to live even more because I had almost ended my life the prior year. So I'm traveling and I'm enjoying life. I'm healing out loud, not even knowing it, but it just felt good. And I started connecting with my body and soul and forgiving myself. I had to forgive myself because I was judging myself so harshly that it was I that was creating the chaos, because I had so much pressure, like you said, the perfectionism that made me think that I was a bad mother, a bad woman, a bad wife, a bad daughter. And none of that was true. And I had to see that when I connected with my higher power. God didn't God didn't create anybody bad. He doesn't create bad anything. So for me to think that is so not true. And when I started connecting with my heart, meaning turning into my body, connecting with a source, higher power, is when I started shifting. That's when everything started changing internally, because it starts on the inside before it starts to show up on the outside.
And that's so good, because you're talking about building a belief system at one point. Because when you're in those thoughts or those ideations, you really have lost everything. Like you have lost even possibly your faith in that moment.
Yes.
And so what I'm hearing is you just started from the ground up and you started building that belief system that started empowering you. And I love that you mentioned putting affirmations up, because we are visual learners, and we have to address the subconscious as well, because if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. It really is. And I love that you mentioned that, because you have to constantly feed what you want to see, as far as the outcomes in your life and things like that. I love that you mentioned COVID being a saving grace for you, because I very much feel it was the same thing for me too. Me and my children. So I can totally relate to that. So tell me, you're rebuilding during isolation. You're taking advantage of this opportunity of the slowdown, because I think that's what it was, is just having a slowdown enough for you to focus on starting that healing journey. What other like supports or mentors came in at that time to help you continue on?
So that is a great question. So obviously after my attempt, I was hospitalized. I was on medication, had a counselor, a therapist that I was working with. But outside of that, when I was doing my spiritual work, I actually had what I call a sponsor.
Mhm.
And it was essentially like a coach, an accountability partner. So as I was asking myself these questions and doing this work, I had someone to be able to essentially confess it to and be able to verbalize it to, because then that's basically me admitting it, accepting it, and then moving past it. And that was one of the main things that I did in the entire 2020. I would say probably around the time the shutdown began until maybe the end of November, early December. And that was what I needed. I realized that the pandemic was God's way of giving me the opportunity to do the work that I was so desperately trying to run from. And that's essentially why I had the attempt, is because I was not ready to face the emotions and the feelings inside of me. And because that didn't work, I didn't have any other choice but to just do something different. Because staying in chaos and in darkness, that didn't feel good. And that's not me. And I know that's not me. And when I got back to realizing who I really am and what I love people, I love connection, I love engaging and interacting and teaching and smiling and laughing. I want to get back to that piece of life. And I absolutely can. And we all can if we're willing to do the work to get out of the darkness. It's
Mhm.
not happening to us, but it's happening for us to
Mhm.
get to another level of greatness, is essentially what happened.
I love that. And I often use the term it's not happening to us, but for us. So, and you've said it a couple of times, it just kind of talking about things. So, explain that concept, explain what that means to our listeners.
Whenever something goes bad in life, the first thing we say is, "Oh God, why did this happen to me? Why is this always
Mhm.
happening to me?" I know, because I was the biggest victim in my life. Why me? Why me? Why does God keep taking my parents? Why does God take my family? Why does God want me to be alone?
Mhm.
And I had to realize that no, He's not doing anything for you to be alone. But what He wants you to do is pay attention to what's happening, because there's something that you're stuck in that you have got to work through in order to enjoy a fulfilling life. And it wasn't until I separated from my husband, and started doing the work during the pandemic that I was able to be still and get quiet and just start doing the work. So that's when I realized the separation and us separating and leaving and me starting over happened for me. It didn't happen to me. It happened for me to do the work so that I can show up this version of me today, because 5 years ago, I would have never imagined being this Keana that you see today. Because 5 years ago, I didn't want to even be here. So I'm just so
Mhm.
grateful to be here and to understand that that happened for me to help others in their journeys and to help them not have to suffer in silence the way that I did, because we don't have to if we're willing to be honest and be authentic and say that I'm not okay and I do need support. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's what God wants us to do. We're here to empower and serve and uplift each other.
Mhm. And I love that you say that because I absolutely 100% agree with you. I think that we are all here to help lead others out of their darkness for sure, being that beacon of light, hope,
Yes.
and encouragement. So okay, here you are. It's COVID. You're taking actions, meditating, praying, and just reconnection of mind, body, and spirit. And so what was that mind shift like for you? When did it just kind of hit you and you're like, okay, I get it. This is what it is. What was that like? Describe it for us.
So that shift, I think the shift that ultimately propelled me to the moment that I'm at today is, I guess I would consider it a midlife transformation. I turned 40 this past October, and I took myself on a spiritual retreat. I went through a breakup, and it
Mm,
triggered some things.
mhm,
But instead of me checking out, I checked in with
mm,
myself.
mhm,
And in the midst of doing this spiritual work, doing the energetic work, letting go of the emotions, because I didn't realize that the body keeps score and
mhm,
that the energy from everything was still inside of my body. And when I started doing that work, I got a message, a clear message from God saying it's time for you to put your book out. It's time for you to coach. And it's time for you to see that you have a gift in this world, your gift of vulnerability, of authenticity, of being able to connect with people. That's a gift that you should be sharing with the entire world to save lives on a much higher level than what I was doing working in human resources for 16 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I told God at the beginning of the year, I'm going to coach and I'm going to take this year to write the book. However, if the job is in the way, then take the job out of the equation. April 15th, the job was gone. And I said, what's next? And I just did the work. So it took me, again, having to be authentic and be honest, be willing to let go of old stories.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I was going through the breakup again, it had me, of course, thinking about my situation with my husband. But this time I realized I didn't do anything wrong. I did everything right. So this is not even about me because I know who I am. I know how hard I work to get to this place. I know the value of life because I almost lost my life. I worked too hard to allow anything or anyone to take me out of a place of gratitude. Just being grateful for a breath, just being grateful to open up my eyes today. That was the game changer for me, was practicing gratitude all every day for the smallest things. And to some people, getting out the bed may not seem like a huge win and something to be grateful for. But when you are depressed and thinking about whether or not you even want to be alive today, that's a huge win. So when I started being grateful for those things, celebrating myself, that's when I started transforming. And I just healed out loud. I was able to just embrace who I am. And I'm a loving person who just has emotions that feelings. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's when I get powerless that I get into trouble, but I'm no longer powerless. Challenged, yes, because I'm human. I'm not cured because it's not easy. And every day it will be something different because that's life. But I don't judge myself if I'm having a bad day because it used to terrify me. I used to be very critical, but now I realize again, it's just a moment.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the whole story. It could just be for a minute or an hour, or maybe it is the whole day or 2 days. But what are you going to do to get out of it? What's next? And that's what I have to start doing. What's next? Because you don't have to stay here. It's easy to get comfortable in darkness because it's easy to wallow in self-pity. But the strength that you find in pulling yourself out of that is priceless. That's something that no one can ever take away from you. It is your strength and resiliency.
I love that. And I love how you just reaffirm, like, I'm human. I fall trapped to those emotions because we all, that's how we're wired, that's how we're built.
Yes.
And it's okay to accept it. I hear a lot of grace and like grace for yourself, self-compassion, acceptance. I hear it all. And I mean, how marvelous is it because you are breaking down those walls. So now you're able to connect and really enjoy, not only feel those moments of despair, but you feel those moments of achievements and success. I mean, that has to be a whole different feeling for you coming out of this healing journey. I know for me it was.
Yeah. Do you know what? That is an excellent question. I never even stopped to think about the magnitude of how wonderful this experience has been. I guess because I'm living it. And to me, all I was doing is just making sure that I made every day of my life count. And whether that's just smiling at somebody, just offering some friendly advice, whatever the case may be, knowing that, okay, I live this day to the best of my ability, doing something good for someone else, I'm at peace with that. And no, it's not going to always be easy, but I have to remember my why. It's hard for me to even celebrate myself sometimes, though. I realize that I get uncomfortable with recognition and I still have to work on that. Even now in this space, even though I'm being completely vulnerable and authentic, because my book is my own struggles, and there's things in there that most people would be very shocked about, not just the suicide, but just other parts. And I do it because I want everyone to see that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you did in your past, or how you may have hurt somebody, or how somebody may have hurt you. That doesn't define you. And when you forgive yourself and whoever the other person is that you're perhaps holding a grudge against, once you can forgive and get past that, that's when you're winning. That's when you start to see the light and start to be able to embrace your gifts and get creative and start to see that your life matters, because your life does matter. Your voice matters, and you have a purpose in this world that you may not even be living in. I had to see that. Even in corporate, for years, I felt disconnected, and I couldn't understand why jobs kept just ending abruptly. And I'm like, what is it? What is it? And it happened so much that I eventually got used to it. But this last time I said, I understand the assignment, God. You're right. I asked for this. I'm ready because I'm paying attention. And the more I do that, the more I have faith, the more abundance I receive. And every day I wake up on purpose, with purpose.
Oh, love it. Love it. So give us some maybe strategies or lessons that we could maybe put in our daily practice. Help us achieve that level of, peace in our lives. What would you like to share?
So I always suggest, and even when I work with my coaching clients, the thing for me that really started was just the moment you wake up in the morning, stop and think of three things that you are grateful for in that moment, even before you get out of bed, and set the intention for your day. I want this day to look like X, Y, and Z. Set that the minute you get out of bed, and just allow the day to unfold. But as long as you remain in a heart, mind space, knowing that whatever that intention was that you set for that day, that is the way you're going to show up in the world, regardless of what happens around you. So I would say just start with those two simple things and just take it one day at a time. Watch what happens. It really is an internal shift that will start to help you see all of the good things in life, because there's so many good things, yet we get so accustomed to just the negative. We've got to reframe our brains to see the good. Even in the negative things, they're still good. But it requires a mindset shift to be able to see good and even in the bad.
Mm-hmm. I love that so much. And I mean, it is so true. Set your intentions for the day. If you are focused on, oh my gosh, this, and the anxiety levels are high, you're going to receive that. You're truly going to manifest that in your interactions and your day-to-day task and things like that. So I get it. Okay, Keana, if people want to get in contact with you outside of this podcast, how do they do that?
Yes, you guys can follow me on my Instagram at I am Keana Shatteen Empowerment. You can find the link to the pre-order for my book, Healing Out Loud. It is launching on September 10th on World Suicide Prevention Day. As a suicide survivor, I dedicate this book to those that are suffering in silence, those that have survived, and those that have attempted and still are living. This book is dedicated to them. And any of the proceeds of the pre-sale go towards the AFSP Out of Darkness Walk right now. As well as follow me on my TikTok at KS Empowerment and Facebook KS Empowerment. And I am also doing coaching and group coaching sessions. So stay tuned for more info on that as well.
Oh, I love it. All right, everyone, you heard it. Keana, she's a coach, she's inspiring, and she's got a book coming out. So make sure to get those pre-orders in, because it goes to a good cause for sure. Everyone, I am Angelina Mojica, your life coach, sending you much love, much peace, many blessings.